In 1933, the pantry holds cornmeal, a heel of lard, 3 onions, and whatever came out of the garden before the frost. 6 people sit at the table. They are not waiting to survive. They are waiting to eat. Because the woman standing at that stove is not improvising. She is executing a cuisine, complete, intelligent, and invisible to every food historian who ever got paid to write about American cooking. 100 meals, 2 decades, the most efficient food system this country ever produced. We threw all of it away. This is what we lost. Number 100. Cornmeal mush. Before there was breakfast cereal, before there were drive-thrus, before anyone had heard the word wellness, there was a pot of cornmeal on a wood stove in the rural South and the hollows of Appalachia. A pound of cornmeal cost 3 cents in 1933. You stirred it into salted boiling water until it thickened to the consistency of wet cement, then poured it into a bowl and ate it hot with a little lard worked through it. What didn't get eaten got poured into a pan, left to cool overnight, and fried in slices the next morning. Crisp on the outside, dense and warm inside. 2 meals from one pot from 3 cents. The family ate. Nobody called it genius. It was just breakfast. Number 99. Flour gravy on biscuits. There was no meat in this gravy. That is the first thing to understand. In the Ozarks and throughout the rural South in the 1930s, flour gravy, white gravy, milk gravy, sawmill gravy, call it what you want, was made from 2 tablespoons of lard left in the pan, 2 tablespoons of flour browned in it, and whatever liquid was available. Milk if you had it, water if you didn't. Salt and black pepper cracked over the top. It was poured over biscuits made from the same flour. A bag of flour cost 9 cents. The biscuits cost almost nothing to make. The gravy cost even less. A family of 5 sat down to a hot breakfast for under a nickel, and nobody at that table felt poor, because nobody at that table was told they were poor. The biscuits were hot. The gravy was thick. That was enough. Number 98. Bread porridge. In the Italian immigrant tenements of Lower Manhattan and South Philadelphia in the 1930s, stale bread was never discarded. It was soaked. Hot water poured over yesterday's bread, or the day before yesterday's, softened it back into something almost creamy. A little olive oil if there was olive oil, salt, sometimes a clove of garlic rubbed across the crust before soaking. Italian grandmothers called it variations of acqua cotta, cooked water, depending on which region of Italy their family came from. What it was, stripped to its frame, was free food. The bread had already been paid for. It had already fed the family once. Now it was feeding them again. Today they call it ribollita and charge $15 a bowl in restaurants that list the olive oil's country of origin on the menu. Then it was Tuesday's supper in a railroad apartment on Mulberry Street. Number 97. Sourdough starter pancakes on the Dust Bowl plains of Oklahoma and Kansas in the 1930s. Families maintained sourdough starters the way other families maintained bank accounts, carefully, with full understanding that the starter was a financial asset. A live culture of wild yeast and bacteria fed with flour and water. You never bought yeast again. You fed the starter, and the starter fed you. Pancakes made from sourdough starter were thinner than modern pancakes, with a slight tang, and they cooked fast on a lard-greased griddle. Eaten with molasses, not maple syrup, molasses which cost less and came in larger quantities. They were breakfast for a family of 6 for a few cents. Some of those starters were kept alive for years, decades. The knowledge of how to maintain them died with the grandmothers who kept them. We are only now, in the age of artisanal bread, beginning to understand what we threw away. Number 96. Cornbread and buttermilk. This one requires no stove. You crumbled cold leftover cornbread into a glass of buttermilk, and you ate it with a spoon. That was the whole meal. In the rural South, throughout the 1930s, this was supper for millions of families, not a snack, not a side, supper, and it was a complete meal in a way that modern nutrition has since confirmed. The fermented bacteria in the buttermilk, the complex carbohydrate in the cornbread, the fat from the lard it was cooked in. A quart of buttermilk cost 10 cents. The cornbread was yesterday's. The meal cost almost nothing, required no heat, and took 30 seconds to prepare. Grandma just called it supper. She was right. Number 95. Fried cornbread cakes thinner than regular cornbread. Cooked on a dry iron skillet over direct heat with no oven required. Critical in a sharecropper cabin in the Mississippi Delta where the oven was unreliable or non-existent. Cornmeal, water, a little lard worked into the batter, pressed flat onto the hot iron, cooked until the edges crisped and the center firmed. In Alabama, they called them hoe cakes, a name that traced back to field workers cooking them on the flat of a hoe blade over an open fire. The name survived, the meal survived. The knowledge of how to make them without a recipe, without a measuring cup, without anything but your hands and a hot pan, that is what we lost. You could feel when the batter was right. Your grandmother knew. You were supposed to learn it from her. Number 94. Oatmeal with lard and salt, no brown sugar, no maple syrup, no blueberries pressed into the top for the Instagram photograph. In northern industrial cities, Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, working-class families in the 1930s ate oatmeal the way it had been eaten for centuries before the Quaker Oats Company decided breakfast needed to be sweet. A pot of rolled oats, cooked in water, served with a small spoon of lard stirred in and a pinch of salt on top. The lard provided the fat your body needed for sustained energy through a 10-hour shift. The oats provided the slow-burning carbohydrate. It cost 5 cents a pound, and a pound made breakfast for 4 people for 2 days. The cereal industry spent 40 years teaching Americans that sweetened, processed breakfast was modern and sophisticated. Oatmeal with lard was neither of those things. It was also better. Number 93. Saltine cracker soup on the Great Plains. In the flat middle of the country where the wind came in under the doors and the fields had stopped producing, there was a meal that required 4 things: hot water, butter, salt, and crackers. A box of saltines cost 5 cents. Butter was rationed carefully, a scrape, not a spread. Boiling water poured over crackers in a bowl, a small knob of butter melting into it, a pinch of salt on top. It sounds like nothing. It was nothing, technically. But it was hot, and it was filling enough to get a child through a school morning, and millions of American children ate exactly this on exactly those mornings. Nobody put it in a cookbook. It didn't need a cookbook. You just made it. Number 92. Bread heel sandwiches, the end pieces of the bread loaf. Every bakery had them. Every family had them. In urban immigrant neighborhoods, the Polish and Czech blocks of Chicago, the Jewish tenements of the Lower East Side, the Italian neighborhoods of South Boston, the bread heels were not wasted. They were the lunch bread, spread with lard, or with yellow mustard if you had it, or with a scrape of chicken fat if your family kept that tradition, folded together and wrapped in wax paper for the factory floor, for the construction site, for the school satchel. A heel sandwich fed a man through a morning shift at the steel mill. It cost essentially nothing because it was the part of the bread nobody else wanted. The bakery sold it cheapest. The family that bought it cheapest was feeding its children best, because the crust held more nutrients per ounce than the soft interior. They knew that. Nobody told them. They just knew. Number 91. Hominy grits dried corn processed with lye, an ancient technique borrowed from indigenous cooking that removes the outer hull and transforms the kernel into something larger, softer, and more nutritionally available to the human body. The nixtamalization process, as food scientists now call it, increases the niacin content of corn dramatically. Pellagra, a niacin deficiency disease that killed tens of thousands of Americans in the early 20th century, was largely absent in communities that processed their corn this way. In Georgia, the Carolinas, and Tennessee in the 1930s, hominy grits cost 4 cents a pound and appeared at every meal. Breakfast with eggs, dinner with pot liquor, supper with whatever was left. Today we call it grits and charge $8 for a small bowl at brunch. Then it was just what corn became when you knew what to do with it. Number 90. Bone broth soup butchers in the 1930s gave bones away. The marrow bones, the knuckle bones, the feet, thrown in with your order or sold for pennies as scrap. Grandma simmered them 8 hours with an onion and whatever herbs grew near the back door. The result was rich, dark, gelatinous, and loaded with collagen, glycine, and minerals. Today it sells for $12 a jar at Whole Foods, labeled with the phrase "ancient wisdom." She was right. Everything she knew was right. Number 89. Potato soup, water, potatoes, onion, lard, salt. In Irish-American households across Pennsylvania and the Midwest, a 10-pound bag of potatoes cost 10 cents and made this soup 4 times over. Nothing was peeled. The skin went in. The pot simmered until the potatoes softened, some mashed against the side to thicken the broth. Thick, white, filling. A pot fed a family of 5 for 2 days. Number 88. Homemade tomato soup. Rural families in the South and Midwest grew tomatoes in summer and canned them by the dozen in August. All winter, those jars came down from the shelf. Tomatoes pushed through a sieve with butter and a pinch of sugar made a soup that bore no resemblance to anything Campbell's ever produced. Brighter, more acidic, warmer, alive. Cost nearly zero if the garden was yours. Number 87. Bean soup with ham hock 1. Smoked ham hock. A pound of navy beans soaked overnight, water, onion, black pepper. Simmered all day in Appalachian and Deep South kitchens until the beans softened into the broth and the meat fell from the bone in dark, smoky threads. 5 cents for the beans. The hock cost a dime. Fed a family of 6 for 2 full days. Number 86. Mulligan's stew along the railroad lines of Depression-era America in the hobo camps called Hoovervilles. Men gathered around fires and made communal stew. Every man contributed something: a potato pulled from a field, a stolen carrot, a can of something found in a trash pile. The rule was simple: if you eat, you contribute. Nothing was refused, nothing was wasted. The result was always different. It was always hot. It was always shared. Grandma just called it making do. Number 85. Onion soup. Onions were the cheapest vegetable in every market in Depression-era America. 3 cents a pound, sometimes less. In Louisiana French communities, onions were caramelized low and slow in lard until they turned the color of dark honey, then covered with water and simmered with a heel of stale bread dropped in to thicken. What came out of the pot was not thin or sad. It was deep and sweet and brown and warming. Paris called it French onion soup. Louisiana grandmothers just called it supper. Number 84. Corn chowder. Dried corn or home canned corn. Diced potatoes, onion, milk, flour, lard. In New England and the Great Lakes region in the 1930s, this thickened, creamy chowder was a complete winter meal. The dried corn was reconstituted by the long simmer. The potatoes broke down slightly and gave the broth body. A pot cost under 15 cents and fed a family warmly on the coldest January days. Number 83. Vegetable peel soup. During WWII, federal government published pamphlets instructing American housewives to save every vegetable peel. Potato skins, carrot tops, onion skins, celery leaves in a pot on the stove all week. On Sunday, they were simmered into broth. Modern nutritional science has since confirmed what those pamphlets insisted. The outer layers of vegetables contain concentrated nutrients. The peel is not waste. It never was. The industry just needed you to throw it away so you'd buy more vegetables. Number 82. Split pea soup. A ham bone saved from Sunday dinner. A pound of dried split peas at 6 cents. Water, onion, salt. Northern immigrant households, Scandinavian, German, Dutch, simmered this on Sundays and ate it through Wednesday. The peas dissolved into the broth entirely, creating something thick as paste and deeply satisfying. Eaten with dark bread. Fed the family 4 meals from one pot. Number 81. Pot liquor. Collard greens, turnip greens, or mustard greens had cooked for 2 hours with a piece of fat back, and what remained in the bottom of the pot was not broth. It was darker, silkier, more mineral than that. Nutritionists at Tuskegee University documented it in the 1930s. Every vitamin the greens gave up during cooking concentrated in that liquid. Iron, calcium, folate. Poured over cornbread, it was the most nutritious meal on a Depression-era table. Grandma just called it not wasting good food. Number 80. Pinto beans and cornbread across Texas, New Mexico, and the Appalachian Highlands in the 1930s. This combination was not a side dish. It was the meal. Beans and corn together form a complete protein, complementary amino acids filling each other's gaps. 5 cents for the beans, 3 cents for the cornmeal. A family of 5 ate well. Nobody called it plant-based nutrition, they called it dinner. Number 79. Red beans and rice. Monday was wash day in Louisiana. The day laundry required all-day tending. Red beans went on the stove in the morning and cooked unattended while the washing was done. By evening, the beans had thickened into a dark, rich, smoky gravy over white rice. 4 cents for the beans, 3 cents for the rice. Still eaten every Monday in New Orleans. Some traditions survive because they are too good to die. Number 78. Black-eyed peas with fatback. The New Year's tradition of eating black-eyed peas for luck has African roots carried through slavery into the Deep South. By the Depression, luck had nothing to do with it. Black-eyed peas were cheap, filling, and grew well in southern soil. Cooked with a piece of fatback for richness and eaten with cornbread, they were everyday food in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi from January through December. Number 77. Lima bean casserole. Lima beans baked slowly with onion, a little lard, salt, and water until they turned creamy and the edges caramelized against the sides of the pan. Rural Midwest and Appalachian grandmothers made this weekly. It required nothing but time and a low oven. By 1960, lima beans had become the vegetable children were punished with at the dinner table. That is what happens when a food loses its context, it loses its dignity. Number 76. Lentil stew. Polish, Hungarian, and Ukrainian grandmothers in the industrial cities of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Illinois knew lentils the way Anglo-American cooks knew beans. 4 cents a pound, cooked with onion, garlic, and a bay leaf into a dense, almost meaty stew. Eaten over bread or with a boiled potato. Anglo-American culture has barely discovered lentils even now. The immigrant grandmothers knew things about feeding a family that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. Number 75. Hoppin' John black-eyed peas and rice cooked together in one pot, a tradition carried from West Africa through the slave trade into the South Carolina Lowcountry and from there across the entire Deep South. The rice absorbed the liquid from the peas. The peas flavored the rice. Together they created something greater than either alone. It cost almost nothing. It was eaten on New Year's Day and every other day. The African culinary tradition that survived every attempt to erase it. Number 74. Boston baked beans. Navy beans slow-baked for 8 hours in a clay pot with molasses, salt pork, mustard, and onion. This was not a side dish in 1930s New England. This was Saturday supper and Sunday breakfast and Monday lunch. The beans absorbed the molasses and turned the color of dark wood. The salt pork melted into the pot. A pound of beans at 5 cents fed a family through the weekend. Nothing was added. Nothing was needed. Number 73. Chickpea stew. Italian grandmothers in New York and New Jersey called them sassi. Greek grandmothers called them revithia. They cost 6 cents a pound, absorbed whatever flavors you cooked them with. Tomato, rosemary, garlic, olive oil when there was olive oil, and produced a stew so thick and warming it required nothing alongside it. Today restaurants list this on the menu under rustic Italian and charge $16. Then it was Tuesday dinner in a tenement apartment on Hester Street. Number 72. Bean patties. Leftover beans, any beans, mashed with a fork, seasoned with onion and salt, shaped into patties, and fried flat in a cast-iron pan until a dark crust formed on both sides, eaten on bread or alongside greens. This was the Depression-era vegetable burger, made 70 years before the food industry decided to patent the idea and sell it back to you for $5 at a fast food counter. Nobody called it innovation. It was just not wasting yesterday's beans. Number 71. Butter bean soup. Large, pale lima beans, butter beans. In the Virginia and Tennessee tradition, simmered in water with onion and a little salt pork until the beans began to break down and thicken the broth naturally. No cream required, no thickener required. The beans did it themselves. Creamy, white, and mild, it was the soup fed to sick children and elderly grandparents and anyone who needed something gentle and sustaining. It cost almost nothing. It tasted like being taken care of. Number 70. Egg drop soup. 1 egg, beaten and drizzled into simmering salted broth while stirring. It cooked in ribbons, pale yellow, silky, filling. In Chinese American communities on the West Coast in the 1930s, this was how 1 egg fed 3 people. Eggs cost 18 cents a dozen. 1 egg cost less than 2 cents. The broth was already on the stove. This was not a recipe, it was arithmetic. Number 69. Creamed eggs on toast. Hard-boiled eggs sliced into a white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk poured over toast. The government promoted this exact meal during WWII as an economical protein source for homefront families. It required no special skill and produced a complete, filling plate for a few cents. It was eaten for breakfast, lunch, and supper interchangeably depending on what else was available. Nobody makes it anymore. It has no gourmet version. It was just good. Number 68. Fried egg sandwich. 1 egg, fried hard in lard, placed between 2 slices of bread with a scrape of mustard or nothing at all. In factory towns across the industrial Midwest in the 1930s, this was lunch for a man working 12 hours at a furnace or a press. It cost 4 cents. It provided protein and fat sufficient to carry a body through an afternoon of hard labor. Today it appears on brunch menus as a specialty item with a runny yolk and artisan sourdough and a $12 price tag. Then it was just lunch. Number 67. Egg foo. Young eggs beaten and folded with whatever vegetables were available. Bean sprouts, scallions, cabbage, any combination, then fried as thick patties in a hot pan. In Chinese immigrant communities in the 1930s, this was the original protein extender. 1 or 2 eggs feeding 3 or 4 people when supplemented with enough vegetable bulk, served with a thin brown gravy made from the pan drippings. The food was simultaneously economical, complete, and deeply satisfying. Nothing wasted. Number 66. Cottage cheese and bread on Midwestern farm families' tables. Cottage cheese was not bought. It was made from milk that had soured and turned. The curds were drained through cloth and salted. Nothing discarded. A pot of sour milk became a bowl of fresh cheese at no additional cost. Spread on bread with a little salt, it was a complete meal. The protein in the curds was identical to the protein in expensive fresh dairy. The price was the moral of the story. Number 65. Buttermilk pancakes. Buttermilk was the liquid left after churning butter, a byproduct of a byproduct, costing almost nothing because it was almost nothing in the commercial sense. But it was acidic, and that acid reacted with baking soda to leaven pancakes without yeast and without time. Thin, slightly tangy, cooked fast on a greased griddle. In rural Southern and Appalachian kitchens, buttermilk pancakes with molasses were breakfast 6 mornings a week. The 7th morning was Sunday, and Sunday got biscuits. Number 64. Milk toast. Toast soaked in warm sweetened milk, fed to sick children, to elderly grandparents, to anyone whose stomach couldn't hold anything heavier. Soft, warm, faintly sweet. In New England and Midwestern households throughout the Depression, this was the sick day meal, the teething baby's meal, the old man's meal. Simple past all description. The kind of food that is indistinguishable from being taken care of. Number 63. Cheese sauce on potatoes. The cheese ends. The last inch of a block that the store couldn't sell whole were bought cheapest and melted into a thick sauce with flour and milk. Poured over boiled or baked potatoes, the sauce made a complete meal from 2 of the cheapest ingredients available. In Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin in the 1930s, this appeared on tables weekly. The cheese had full flavor because it was real cheese, however old. The potatoes had no flavor of their own and needed all the help they could get. Number 62. Egg and potato hash. Yesterday's boiled potatoes, diced and fried flat in a cast iron pan with onion and lard until a crust formed on the bottom, then an egg cracked over the top to cook in the steam. 1 pan. 2 ingredients beyond what was already there. breakfast or supper depending on the time of day. The crust on the bottom of the pan, the part you scraped up last, was the best part. That was always the best part. Number 1. Clabber biscuits milk left to naturally thicken and sour on the counter. Clabber was the leavening agent in biscuits before baking powder became standard in American kitchens. The natural bacteria produced lactic acid that reacted with baking soda to give the biscuits rise. In rural, Southern, and Ozark kitchens in the 1930s, Clabber biscuits were made daily from milk that had been sitting since yesterday. No waste, no purchase. The milk that soured in the heat became the biscuit that fed the morning. Number 60. Potato and onion fried potatoes sliced thin, fried in lard with sliced onion, salt, and black pepper until the edges crisped and the centers softened. Nationwide, in every region, in every decade of the Depression. This was the meal with no name, called by no specific title, because it required no title. You made it when there was nothing else. You made it even when there was something else because it was that good. Nothing complex, just the smell of onion in hot fat filling a cold kitchen. Number 59. Turnip greens. The greens cooked down in a pot with water and a small piece of salt pork for an hour, 2 hours, until they were dark and silky and the pot liquor at the bottom had turned deep green. Then the liquor was drunk from the bowl after the greens were eaten. In the Deep South and Appalachia throughout the 1930s, turnips cost 3 cents a pound, and the greens came free with the root. 2 foods for 1 price. The nutrition in those greens, iron, calcium, vitamins K and A, was eaten whole, nothing discarded. Number 58. Mashed potato cakes. Yesterday's mashed potatoes. Formed by hand into patties and fried in lard until the outside turned golden and crunchy and the inside remained soft and warm. Across the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic states in the 1930s, no mashed potato was ever thrown away. It became tomorrow's pancake, eaten with eggs for breakfast or alongside greens for supper. The second meal from the same potatoes cost nothing because it had already been paid for. Number 57. Root vegetable. Mash. Whatever came out of the root cellar in January, turnips, parsnips, carrots, perhaps a few potatoes, roasted together in whatever fat was available, then mashed together into a rough, sweet, earthy heap. No single vegetable dominated. The flavors blended into something greater than each one alone. Rural Midwestern and Great Plains families ate this all winter. Parsnips made it sweet. Turnips made it sharp. Together they made it dinner. Number 56. Sweet potato and molasses. A sweet potato baked in the oven or in the coals of the fire, split open, drizzled with a spoon of molasses. In the Mississippi Delta and throughout the rural South in the 1930s, this served as breakfast, supper, or dessert, depending entirely on what else was on the table. Sweet potatoes cost 4 cents a pound. Molasses came in large jugs and cost almost nothing per spoonful. The combination was filling, sweet, and deeply nutritious. Beta-carotene from the potato, iron and B vitamins from the molasses. Number 55. Creamed spinach on cornbread. Garden spinach wilted in a pan with lard. A spoonful of flour stirred in to thicken the liquid the leaves released. A little water or milk added to make a sauce. Poured over a wedge of cornbread. In southern tenant farming communities in the 1930s, the garden was the food supply, and whatever the garden gave in June went directly to the table. This cost nothing beyond the cornmeal. The spinach was there. You just had to pick it. Number 54. Beet and potato salad. Boiled beets and boiled potatoes cooled, dressed with vinegar, onion, salt, and a little lard or oil. Polish and Ukrainian immigrant communities throughout the industrial Midwest in the 1930s, this was a standard cold preparation eaten from Monday through the rest of the week after being made on Sunday. Beets kept their texture. Vinegar preserved the salad. A bowl made Sunday fed a family through Thursday. Red, sharp, earthy, inexpensive. Number 53. Carrot and onion soup. Victory Garden carrots. Sweet, fresh pulled, or stored in sand in the root cellar. Simmered with onion in water until soft. Then mashed or pushed through a sieve into a smooth, bright orange soup. During WWII, when every backyard in America was theoretically a vegetable garden, this soup fed families on what they grew themselves. It was sweet from the carrots, savory from the onion, and required nothing additional. Gone from American tables entirely by 1960, when Ancan soup made cooking it feel unnecessary. Number 52. Fried green tomatoes. At the end of the growing season, when the first frost was coming and the tomatoes on the vine hadn't ripened, they were picked green, sliced, pressed into seasoned cornmeal, and fried in lard. Not a delicacy, not a southern specialty for tourists, a method for eating what would otherwise be lost to the cold. Crisp outside, tart inside, eaten standing at the stove or at the table alongside whatever else dinner was that evening. Nothing wasted, nothing left on the vine. Number 51. Parsnip fritters. Grated raw parsnips bound with a beaten egg and a spoonful of flour, dropped into hot lard and fried into golden-edged cakes. In New England and Pennsylvania Dutch communities in the 1930s, parsnips were a staple winter root that kept in cold storage for months. Sweet, slightly nutty, entirely forgotten by the American table after the 1950s, when frozen vegetables made fresh root storage seem old-fashioned. A vegetable that could sustain a family through February, abandoned because it required a root cellar and not a freezer. Number 50. Liver and onions, the cheapest cut at every butcher in Depression-era America. Beef liver at 5 cents a pound. Sliced, dredged in flour, fried in lard with sliced onions until the liver firmed and the onions caramelized into soft, sweet threads. The nutritional density of beef liver is unmatched by any common food. More vitamin A per ounce than carrots, more B12 than any other meat, more iron than spinach. After WWII, as cheap muscle cuts became available and aspirational, liver was reframed as the poor man's meat. They gave away the most nutritious thing on the table. Number 49. Salt pork and greens. 1 piece of salt pork, cured in salt, preserved for months without refrigeration, dropped into a pot of collards or turnip greens with water and a lid, simmered for hours. The pork flavored everything and provided fat. The greens provided everything else. In the Deep South and Appalachian communities of the 1930s, this was the foundational meal. Salt pork cost 8 cents a pound, and 1 piece lasted a week of daily cooking if used judiciously. Number 48. Head cheese. The pig's head boiled down until the meat fell from the bone, then removed, chopped, seasoned with vinegar and spices, and packed into a mold where the natural gelatin from the bones allowed it to set solid. Sliced cold, eaten on bread or cornbread. In German and Eastern European immigrant communities, this was not poverty food. It was butchering tradition, the completion of the animal, the final act of respect for something that had fed your family. Today it appears on charcuterie boards labeled as artisanal and priced at $22 an ounce. Number 47. Menudo tripe, the stomach lining of the cow simmered for hours with hominy, dried red chiles, garlic, and oregano in Mexican-American communities across the Southwest. It was Sunday morning food, hangover food, new baby food, Christmas morning food. Tripe cost 4 cents a pound because Anglo butchers had no use for it. The Mexican grandmothers who transformed it into menudo knew things about collagen, slow cooking, and flavor extraction that no culinary school has ever adequately taught. Some traditions survive because the communities that hold them refuse to be embarrassed into abandoning them. Number 46. Oxtail soup. Butchers threw the oxtail away or sold it for nearly nothing, 6 cents a pound, considered worthless. In African American communities across the country, grandmothers simmered those tails for 6 hours until the collagen in the bones dissolved into the broth and the meat fell loose and dark and deeply flavored. What they produced was among the most nutritionally complete soups a kitchen could make. Today, oxtail sells for $18 a pound at specialty butchers. The communities that never forgot how to cook it watched the price climb and kept cooking it anyway. Number 45. Chicken feet soup given away free by butchers who had no other use for them. In Chinese American and African American communities in the 1930s, chicken feet were simmered into broth for hours, the collagen and gelatin and minerals releasing slowly into the liquid until the broth was thick enough to set solid when cooled. The richest broth a chicken could produce came from the part of the chicken nobody else wanted, now sold as a delicacy in dim sum restaurants. Then it was Tuesday's broth, and Tuesday fed the whole week. Number 44. Fried fatback, pure pork fat, cut from the back of the pig, salted and cured, sliced thin and fried in a dry pan until the fat rendered out and the pieces turned crisp and brown. Eaten with cornbread, eaten on biscuits, eaten plain, picked from the pan with fingers while the cornbread baked. This was the original bacon. Before the meat industry decided bacon required a leaner cut and a higher price. Fatback cost 4 cents a pound. It contained the fat a working body needed. In the rural South, it was kept on every table. Number 43. Bologna sandwich. The cheapest sliced meat at the deli counter, 10 cents a pound in the 1930s. 2 slices of bologna, yellow mustard, white bread, wrapped in wax paper. In the steel mill towns of Pittsburgh, Gary, and Cleveland, this was lunch 6 days a week for men working 12-hour shifts. Not glamorous, not varied, sufficient. The lunch that built the industrial Midwest, packed in a tin pail and eaten standing near a furnace at noon. Number 42. Tongue tacos beef tongue, braised for 4 hours in water with onion and garlic until the outer skin peeled away and the meat underneath was soft, dark, and richly flavored. Chopped and served in tortillas with salsa and onion. In Mexican-American communities in Texas and California in the 1930s, beef tongue cost 8 cents a pound because Anglo butchers didn't know what to do with it. A single tongue fed a family for Sunday dinner and Monday lunch. Today, a lengua taco costs $4 each at a specialty truck, and it has never once tasted better than it did in those kitchens. Number 41. Sardine and cracker plate. A tin of sardines at 10 cents, a sleeve of crackers, eaten at a kitchen table or a factory break room or the open tailgate of a truck. The sardines provided complete protein, omega-3 fatty acids in quantities that modern nutritional science considers optimal calcium from the bones eaten soft. This was not known then. What was known then was that sardines were cheap, filling, and didn't require cooking. A working man's lunch that happened, unknowingly, to be one of the most nutritionally dense single meals on this list. Number 40. Johnny Marzetti named after a Columbus, Ohio restaurant. Ground meat, whatever was cheapest and least. Stretched thin with pasta and canned tomato. Baked in a pan until the top browned and the pasta absorbed the sauce. Fed 8 people for under 30 cents in the 1930s. The Ohio school cafeteria standard. The church potluck centerpiece. The meal that made a little meat go a very long way by never letting the meat be the point. Number 39. Depressionaire Gaulish elbow macaroni, stewed tomato, onion, paprika. No beef required. The Hungarian name survived the removal of the Hungarian ingredient. In Midwestern homes of the 1930s, where Hungarian, Czech, and Slovak immigrant families had settled near the steel mills and meatpacking plants, goulash became macaroni and tomato with a memory of paprika. Cheap, hot, filling. Grandma just called it goulash because that was the shape of the idea even when the beef was gone. Number 38. Milk can supper sausage, potatoes, onions, cabbage, and whatever else was available, layered into a metal milk can with a tight lid and cooked over an outdoor fire or burner for an hour. No stirring, no watching, no dishes beyond the can. In Great Plains farm communities during harvest season, this fed a crew of 10 working men with no one left standing at the stove. Everything cooked in its own steam. Everything absorbed everything else's flavor. One vessel, one fire, done. Number 37. Haymaker's stew made during harvest for the men working the fields. Everything in the root cellar or the garden went into the pot. No recipe, no measurement, no written record of what it contained because it was always different and it didn't matter. What mattered was that it was ready when the men came in from the field, that the pot was large enough, and that the bread was baked. In rural farm communities across the Midwest in the 1930s, this fed harvest crews for generations. Not one version of this recipe exists. There were thousands of versions, and they were all correct. Number 36, tamal pie, a cornmeal crust pressed into a baking pan, filled with a mixture of chili-seasoned beans and whatever meat scraps were available. Then another layer of cornmeal pressed over the top and baked. The tamale for people who had no time or space to make actual tamales. In Texas and California in the 1930s, this was the weeknight version of a Sunday tradition, faster, simpler, equally filling, built on the same ingredients. The concept of adapting a labor-intensive tradition into an everyday format, that is culinary intelligence. Number 35, chicken and dumplings. The laying hen was too old for the egg business. Her eggs had slowed, then stopped. That made her the dinner business. Simmered all day in a pot of water with onion and celery until the meat fell from the bone. Then flour dumplings dropped by the spoonful into the hot broth and cooked through, swelling and softening into pale, dense pillows. The broth turned creamy from the chicken fat. The dumplings absorbed the broth. In the rural South and Appalachia, this was the meal that transformed the end of a hen's useful life into the best dinner of the month. Number 34. Pork and hominy stew, salt pork and nixtamalized hominy simmered together in water with onion and dried chiles in Appalachian and rural Southern kitchens, a dish that had no name other than what was in it. What it was, stripped of the name it was never given, was pozole. The same dish eaten in Mexican households across the Southwest simultaneously. Two food traditions converging on identical solutions from different directions. Both right, both cheap, both deeply sustaining. Number 33. Tuna noodle casserole canned tuna at 15 cents a tin. Egg noodles, a white sauce made from flour and milk poured together into a baking dish and cooked until the top browned and the noodles absorbed the sauce. The federal government recommended this exact dish during WWII as a rationing-compatible protein meal for homefront families. It was efficient, filling, and required nothing perishable. It is still made, it is still good. It has never needed to be anything more than what it is. Number 30. White pudding, a sausage made without blood, the humbler, quieter cousin of black pudding, made when blood was scarce or when the children at the table refused the dark version and needed something they would eat without a fight. Pork meat and fat, chopped fine or ground, combined with oatmeal, diced onion, salt, and white pepper, packed into a natural casing and either poached gently in water or sliced and fried in a pan until the outside blistered and the inside stayed dense and savory and faintly sweet from the oat. Irish immigrant butchers in Boston and New York were making white pudding by the 1880s, often sold alongside drysheen and black pudding from the same counter in the same Irish neighborhood butcher shops that have since become parking lots and CVS pharmacies. The oatmeal stretched the meat by nearly half and cost almost nothing. One link of white pudding, sliced thin and fried, fed two children a full breakfast alongside a piece of griddle bread and a cup of tea. Grandma just called it the pudding. She never needed more of a name than that, and neither did anyone else who ate it. Number 29. Oat and onion stuffing, not bread stuffing, not the stuffing that comes in a bag. Oats, rolled oats, toasted in a dry pan for 5 minutes until they turned the color of hazelnuts and smelled of warm grain, combined with onions that had been cooked slow in lard until they were translucent and sweet, seasoned with salt and fresh thyme from the window box, bound with just enough water to hold together. Used to fill a chicken or pack around a small piece of pork shoulder, or simply spooned into a baking dish and cooked alongside the roast until the top crisped and the oats absorbed all the fat dripping from the meat above. In Irish immigrant kitchens in the 1910s and 1920s, oats were cheaper than bread and more calorie-dense per penny. The stuffing stretched a bird that might otherwise have fed 4 into a meal for 6. Nothing about that calculation was accidental. Every decision in these kitchens was a calculation, and every calculation was made by a woman who had already done it 100 times before and knew exactly how far each ingredient would go. Number 28. Coal cannon cakes. The leftover coal cannon from Sunday formed into patties Monday morning. Potato and cabbage, pressed flat, laid into a cast iron pan with a scrape of lard, fried until the outside crackled dark and the inside stayed soft and steaming. You could hear them from the next room, that particular hiss and pop of cold potato hitting hot fat. In Hell's Kitchen in 1915, a head of cabbage cost 3 cents. Nothing was wasted. Not a single leaf. Not a single cold spoonful left in the pot. That is not poverty cooking. That is a kind of precision and discipline that modern kitchens, with their refrigerators and their weekly grocery runs, have completely forgotten how to practice. Number 27. Soda bread griddle cakes. Not the round loaf with the cross cut into the top. That came later for the bakeries, for the church socials, for the version of Irish food that was acceptable to show the neighbors. This was the original, flat, cooked directly on a cast iron griddle over a gas flame, no oven required. Flour, baking soda, buttermilk, salt, mixed with as few strokes as possible, dropped by the spoonful onto a hot, dry griddle, flipped once when the edges set. A batch cost under 4 cents in South Boston in 1910 and was made in 15 minutes on a Tuesday morning, before anyone else in the building was awake. The griddle version didn't survive because it wasn't pretty. It didn't slice neatly. It didn't look like something worth keeping. Everything that wasn't pretty got left behind. Number 26. Oatmeal bread, not soda bread, not a yeast loaf. Something older and more particular, a dense, dark loaf made with a combination of oat flour and coarse wheat flour, leavened with baking soda, deepened with a spoon of blackstrap molasses, baked slow and low in a moderate oven for 50 minutes until the crust hardened and cracked along the top, and the center stayed close and slightly sticky when you pressed it. It kept for 4 days without going stale, 5 in the winter when the air was dry and cold. 1 loaf, a family, 5 days of bread from a single bake on Monday morning. In Irish immigrant households in Philadelphia and Baltimore in the 1900s and 1910s and 1920s, oatmeal bread was simply the bread. Nobody called it by a name that required explanation. Nobody wrote the recipe down. It was not considered a recipe. It was considered a basic fact of being a household, as necessary and unremarkable as water. Of course you made oatmeal bread. What else would you make? The question never occurred to anyone until the generation arrived that didn't know how to make it and had no one left to ask. Number 7. Marmalade pudding. The cousin of the steamed treacle sponge, made in exactly the same way, steamed in exactly the same basin, but with orange marmalade where the treacle was. Spooned into the bottom of the greased basin first, the sponge batter poured over the top, sealed, steamed for 90 minutes, then inverted. The marmalade at the base becomes the topping. It goes dark during steaming, slightly jammy, the orange peel softening until it is almost translucent, the bitter-sweet character of a good marmalade intensifying rather than diminishing in the heat. The smell, steam and orange and hot sugar, is its own form of nostalgia even before you've tasted it. In Scottish households and in London's East End, marmalade pudding was a winter staple from the 1940s through the 1970s. Dundee marmalade was considered the finest. Cooper's Oxford marmalade, in its distinctive jar, was a luxury. Frank Cooper's had been making it in Oxford since 1874. The recipe survived the war. It survived rationing. It did not survive the Angel Delight. Number 6. Boiled baby, the old name for a suet roly-poly boiled in a cloth rather than baked in the oven. The name is blunt and a little terrible and entirely British in the way it refuses to dress something up. The same rolled suet pudding as the roly-poly of number 28, but wrapped tightly in a floured cloth tied at both ends and dropped into a pot of boiling water for 2 hours. The cloth leaves its mark on the outside. A slight cloth weave texture pressed into the surface, the whole thing pale and slightly glistening when you unwrap it at the table. You cut it in slices. The jam inside has become something else entirely during those 2 hours. Deeper, darker, more concentrated, almost a preserve rather than a jam now. This method is older than ovens. Women in industrial Lancashire mill towns boiled their puddings on the fire because they had no oven, or their oven was being used for bread, or coal was too expensive to heat an oven when the fire was already burning. The pot was always on. Pot cost nothing extra. The pudding went in, and 2 hours later it came out, and that was dinner's end solved. Number 5. Flummery, a word that has almost entirely lost its original meaning. In contemporary English, flummery means nonsense, empty talk, hollow ceremony. In the British kitchen from the 17th century through to the early 20th, it meant something specific and beautiful. Originally a Welsh and English dish of steeped oats, oatmeal soaked in water for days until fermented slightly, then boiled down to a thick, slightly sour, gelatinous pudding eaten with honey or cream. By the 18th century, the name had migrated to a cream pudding set with hartshorn or isinglass. By the 19th century, it was a jelly made from almond or lemon. By the 1950s, it appeared occasionally in Welsh farmhouse kitchens as a thick, sweet oat cream, eaten cold, poured over summer fruit. By 1975, it was gone so completely that most people had no idea it had ever been food. The word remained. The pudding did not. A language kept the ghost of a dish while the dish itself evaporated. Number 4. Hasty pudding. The name tells you everything about its philosophy. No time, no fuss, something warm in 10 minutes. Wheat flour or oatmeal stirred into boiling milk or water until it thickened, sweetened with sugar or treacle, eaten immediately. The oldest pudding on this list, and possibly the oldest dessert in the British repertoire, recorded in English cookery books from the 1600s. Eaten by agricultural laborers, mill workers, and miners' families across 4 centuries because it could be made from the cheapest possible ingredients with no equipment beyond a pot and a fire and a wooden spoon. In County Durham's mining communities in the 1930s, a pot of hasty pudding with a little butter stirred in at the end was a child's supper 3 nights a week. It is, in practical terms, what the French call bouillie, what Americans called mush, what Italians developed into polenta, what West Africans made as fufu. The same impulse, the same solution to the same human problem. Grain, heat, milk, sweetness, comfort. This was not poor food. This was genius. Every grandmother who made it was right. Number 3. Groaty pudding. This one belongs to the Black Country, the industrial heartland of the West Midlands, the area of Dudley, Wolverhampton, Tipton, and Walsall, where steel and iron and glass and chain making built one of the most intensely working-class cultures in Britain, and also quietly produced one of its most distinctive local foods. Groats hold whole oat grains, soaked overnight, then slow-cooked with leeks, onion, and shin beef for 6 to 8 hours in a very low oven. This is technically a savory dish, but it was eaten as a complete meal. It was traditionally made on bonfire night and left in the oven all day, and it served the function in those communities that a pudding served elsewhere. It was the warm, filling, slow-made thing that ended the day and sent people to bed satisfied. A pound of groats in 1965 cost 4 pence. A piece of shin beef could be had from the butcher for almost nothing. Fed 6 people. Took almost no active labor, it sat in the oven and asked nothing of you for hours. Here's what the food industry doesn't want you to know. Slow cooking cheap cuts with whole grains provides more collagen, more gelatin, more slow-release energy, and a more sustained feeling of satiety than any ready meal ever manufactured. The Black Country grandmothers, who made groaty pudding for bonfire night, knew things about cheap nutrition that the entire supplement industry is still trying to catch up with. Number 2, damson cheese, not a dairy cheese. A fruit cheese. An intensely flavored, almost solid preserve made by cooking damson plums to a pulp, pressing them through a sieve to remove the stones and skins, then cooking the pulp down with sugar for a very long time until the mixture is so thick it begins to pull away from the sides of the pan. and when set in a mold and cooled, holds its shape. Turned out onto a plate, it looks like a dark jewel. Sliced thin because thin is how you eat it, it has a purple-black color that catches light like stained glass. The flavor is intensely concentrated damson, that specific tart-sweet astringent character that damsons alone possess, sharpened and deepened by the long cooking, utterly unlike jam, utterly unlike jelly, something in between a confection and a condiment and a dessert. In Westmoreland and the Lythe Valley in Cumbria, damson orchards have grown since the 17th century. The valley still produces damsons. The cheese is still made by a handful of families. The rest of Britain has entirely forgotten it exists. Damson cheese was eaten with a slice of hard cheese, a Lancashire, or a Cheshire, or with cold lamb, or alone after a meal with a glass of something. It kept for a year. A jar of it was a gift that cost almost nothing and lasted 12 months and tasted like the distilled memory of every orchard September that ever was. Number 1. Blackcap pudding. This deserves the top position because it is perhaps the most visually striking, the most technically ingenious, and the most completely forgotten pudding on this entire list. A pudding basin, the base lined with currants, cooked briefly in butter, and a little black treacle until they become dark, sticky, almost lacquered. Over this, a plain sponge batter, vanilla, butter, eggs, self-raising flour, the most unassuming batter imaginable, steamed in the usual way for 90 minutes, then inverted onto a plate. The black cap is what the currants become. During steaming, the treacle penetrates the currants, deepens them, turns them from dried fruit to something that glistens and smells of dark sugar and bitter caramel and the very edge of burning. When the pudding is inverted, this coating is the first thing you see. A perfect, gleaming, near-black disk of lacquered fruit sitting on top of a pale, innocent sponge. The contrast is dramatic. The flavor contrast matches it exactly. The barely sweet, soft vanilla sponge against the intensely dark, bittersweet cap. It was in British pudding books from at least the 18th century. It was still being made in London households in the 1960s. By 1985, it had essentially vanished. No one bought it. No one sold it. It simply stopped being made, in house after house, as the women who knew how to make it grew older, and the daughters who might have learned were busy with other things. Careers, commutes, the new convenience of a supermarket that had decided for them what dinner would be. Closing 30 puddings. 30 things that fed Britain through depression and war and rationing and the gray exhaustion of rebuilding, and then vanished in the 15 years of plenty and packaged convenience that followed. Go back through this list. Make the treacle sponge. It takes 40 ingredients, fewer than any recipe you'll find on a food blog. It takes flour, eggs, butter, and a tin of golden syrup and 90 minutes of your time. Steam the roly-poly. Make the black cap pudding and stand at your kitchen counter and watch the moment the pudding releases from its basin and the black cap catches the light, and understand in that moment that no factory in Britain has ever made anything this beautiful. These were not the desserts of people who lacked sophistication. These were the desserts of people who understood, completely and precisely, what food was for, what it did. What it meant to put something warm and sweet and made by hand in front of the people you loved at the end of a day that had asked too much of them. The grandmothers who knew these recipes were not domestic servants. They were not trapped. They were skilled. They were scientists of the hearth. They understood how heat transformed grain, how time transformed fruit, how patience turned the cheapest possible ingredients into something that tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. They knew things about feeding people that we will spend the next 50 years trying to remember. In 1979, Marks & Spencer launched convenience desserts and spent £3 million telling Britain that a woman who cooked a pudding from scratch was wasting her time. That is not progress. That is the calculated destruction of 700 years of working-class culinary knowledge in the service of a quarterly profit margin. She was right. Every single one of them was right. Comment below and tell me which one your grandmother made.